It was a Tuesday evening when everything collapsed, not with shouting or tears, but with sarcasm so sharp it cut through 8 years of marriage like a razor through silk. We were standing in the kitchen, her arms crossed, that look on her face, the one she wore when she thought she had all the power in the room. The smell of reheated pasta hung in the air, the TV murmured in the background, and everything looked normal except it wasn't. "Apologize to Rebecca's wife or I'm filing for divorce," she said, her tone dripping with mockery, like it was the most absurd thing she could say, like she was daring me to take her seriously. I remember the way she tilted her head slightly, that half-smile playing on her lips, the same smile she used when she thought she'd won an argument before it even started. I looked at her for a long moment, the woman I'd shared a home with, built a life with, the woman who now stood across from me like a stranger wearing a familiar face. I set down the glass I'd been holding, wiped my hands on the towel, and said something I never thought I'd say. "Okay, file." The silence that followed was deafening. Her expression shifted from smug confidence to confusion, then to something close to panic. The smile vanished, her eyes widened just slightly, and for the first time in weeks I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. What she stammered, her voice suddenly smaller, less sure. "I said file," I repeated calmly, meeting her eyes without blinking. "If that's what you want, go ahead. I'm not apologizing for something I didn't do wrong." Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for words that wouldn't come, like someone had pulled the script right out of her hands and she didn't know how to improvise. This whole mess started 3 weeks earlier at Rebecca's birthday party, one of those gatherings where everyone pretends to have more fun than they actually are. Rebecca was Amanda's best friend since college, loud, opinionated, always the center of attention, the kind of person who filled every room she entered. Her wife Nicole was quieter, polite on the surface, but with an edge that made every conversation feel like a test you didn't know you were taking. That night Nicole had too much wine. I could tell by the way her laugh got louder, the way her words started to slur just at the edges. She started making comments, little jabs disguised as jokes, the kind that make everyone laugh nervously because no one knows if they should agree or defend. She mentioned how some men never grow up, how they prioritize hobbies over family, how they think providing money is the same as being present. I didn't react at first. I was used to passive-aggressive remarks at these gatherings, the veiled criticisms wrapped in humor, the way certain people use social settings to say things they'd never say one-on-one. But then she looked directly at me, her eyes focusing with that sharp clarity that drunk people sometimes have, and said, "Some husbands think fixing a leaky faucet makes them heroes, while their wives handle everything that actually matters." Amanda laughed a little too loud, a little too quickly, like she agreed, like she'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. I felt the weight of it, the implication that I wasn't pulling my weight, that I was some lazy partner who coasted while Amanda carried the load. The other guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down at their drinks, others suddenly found the appetizers fascinating. I stayed calm. I've learned over the years that responding to bait only makes things worse, that engaging with someone who's already decided you're the villain just gives them ammunition. But later that night when we got home, Amanda brought it up again. The car ride had been silent, that thick, uncomfortable silence where you can feel the argument brewing. "Nicole has a point, you know," she said, tossing her purse on the counter with more force than necessary. "You do think you're doing more than you are." I turned to her, genuinely confused, trying to understand where this was coming from. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I work 50 hours a week. I handle the bills, the car maintenance, the yard, the repairs. What exactly am I not doing?" She rolled her eyes, that gesture that always made me feel small, dismissed. "That's exactly what I mean," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You think because you mow the lawn and pay the mortgage you're some kind of superhero. You don't see the invisible labor, the planning, the emotional work, the mental load of running a household." I took a breath, feeling the frustration build but trying to keep it contained. "Amanda, I do see it," I said carefully. "I appreciate everything you do, I really do. But don't diminish what I contribute just because Nicole decided to take shots at me in front of everyone." She didn't answer, just walked away, her footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. And that's when I realized this wasn't about chores or responsibilities. This was about something deeper, something that had been building for months, maybe longer. The next day Rebecca called me, not Amanda, me, which was unusual enough to put me on alert. "Listen," she said, her voice tight and formal, the way people sound when they're delivering a message they don't entirely believe in. "Nicole feels like you were dismissive of her at the party. She thinks you owe her an apology." I laughed, not because it was funny but because it was absurd, because the sheer audacity of it caught me off guard. "Dismissive," I said, trying to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "I didn't say a word to her. She spent the night insulting me, and now she wants an apology." Rebecca sighed, that long, suffering sound of someone caught in the middle. Look, I know it's stupid, she said, lowering her voice like someone might overhear. But just say sorry, smooth it over, it'll make things easier for everyone. I told her I'd think about it, but I already knew I wouldn't do it. I wasn't going to apologize for standing my ground, even if that ground was just silence, even if my only crime was refusing to engage with someone's need for conflict. When Amanda came home that evening, she was cold, distant, moving through the house like I was furniture she had to navigate around. She barely looked at me as she made herself tea, as she scrolled through her phone, as she settled on the couch in a way that made it clear I wasn't welcome to sit beside her. When I tried to talk to her, she cut me off with a wave of her hand. Rebecca told me you refused to apologize, she said, her voice laced with disappointment like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. Because I didn't do anything wrong, I replied, trying to make her understand. She shook her head slowly, that gesture of someone who's already made up their mind. You're so stubborn, she said, the words landing like an accusation. This is exactly why people find you difficult. I felt the sting of that, the accusation that I was the problem, that my refusal to bend to someone else's unreasonable demand made me the villain in this story. Over the next 2 weeks, the tension grew like a living thing between us, filling rooms, making the air heavy. Amanda started spending more time with Rebecca and Nicole, girls' nights that stretched into late evenings, group chats that made her phone buzz constantly, conversations that stopped the moment I walked into the room. I tried to talk to her, tried to bridge the gap, but every attempt was met with sarcasm or cold indifference, with responses that felt rehearsed, like she'd been discussing me with her friends and they'd all agreed on the narrative. Then came that Tuesday, the ultimatum delivered with a smirk, the assumption that I'd cave, that I'd choose keeping the peace over keeping my dignity, that I'd do what I always did and apologize just to make everything smooth again. But I didn't, and when I told her to file, something shifted in the room, in her face, and the entire trajectory of our marriage. She stared at me, her eyes wide, searching my face for the joke, for the moment I'd laugh and say I didn't mean it. You're serious, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Completely, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. If you think this marriage is worth less than an apology I don't owe, then maybe it's already over. She tried to backtrack, her confidence crumbling like sand. I was joking, she said quickly, her hands coming up defensively. You know I wasn't serious, it was just, I was just. Were you? I asked, cutting through her excuses. Because it didn't sound like a joke, it sounded like a threat. It sounded like you've been looking for a reason to make me the bad guy and you finally found one. She looked away, unable to hold my gaze, and I saw something in her posture change, saw the realization that she'd pushed too far. I continued, my voice steady but firm. You spent weeks making me feel like I'm the problem, like I'm not enough, like I need to apologize for existing in a way that doesn't please your friends. And I'm done with that. I'm done shrinking myself to fit into whatever box you and Nicole have decided I should fit into. She tried to argue, tried to flip it back on me, to make it about my tone or my attitude or anything except what it actually was, but I didn't engage. I walked out of the kitchen, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door and left, the door closing behind me with a finality that felt like punctuation. I drove to a quiet park by the river, the one we used to visit when we first started dating, sat on a bench under the streetlights and let the weight of it all settle. I realized I wasn't angry, not really. I was tired, tired of being diminished, tired of being expected to apologize for having boundaries, tired of a marriage that felt more like a performance than a partnership. When I came home 2 hours later, Amanda was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen, tissues scattered around her. I thought you'd come back apologizing, she said quietly, not looking at me. Why would I asked, genuinely curious about her logic. Because you always do, she said, finally meeting my eyes. You always give in, you always make it okay, you always fix it. I sat down across from her, maintaining the distance. Not this time, I said simply. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, like some mask had fallen away and she didn't recognize what was underneath. What changed? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. I replied. I realized I'd rather be alone than stay in a marriage where I'm constantly told I'm not enough, where I have to apologize for things I didn't do just to keep the peace with people who don't even respect me. She started crying again, soft, quiet tears that didn't move me the way they used to, that didn't make me want to immediately comfort her and tell her everything would be okay. I don't want a divorce, she whispered through the tears. Then stop threatening me with one, I said calmly. Stop using our marriage as a bargaining chip. Stop letting your friends dictate what happens in our relationship, and start deciding what you actually want. Over the next few days, things were strange, quiet, uncertain, like we were two people learning how to be around each other again. Amanda stopped bringing up the apology, stopped talking about Rebecca and Nicole altogether, stopped checking her phone every 5 minutes. One evening about a week later, she finally spoke, really spoke, not at me but to me. I talked to Rebecca, she said, sitting down at the kitchen table where this had all started. I told her the whole thing was ridiculous, that I shouldn't have pushed you, that Nicole was out of line. I nodded but didn't respond, waiting to see if there was more. She continued, her voice shaking slightly. Nicole's upset, she thinks I'm choosing you over her. Rebecca says I'm being manipulated, that I'm changing. You are, I said, not unkindly. That's what marriage is supposed to be, choosing your partner, especially when the alternative is choosing people who clearly don't respect your relationship. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. I know, she said softly. I just didn't want to cause drama. I didn't want to lose my friends. You didn't cause it, I said. You just participated in it, and now you have to decide what matters more. A week later, Rebecca called Amanda. I could hear the conversation from the other room, the raised voices, the accusations. Rebecca was angry, accusing Amanda of being manipulated, of changing, of abandoning their friendship. When Amanda hung up, she looked shaken, pale, like she'd just been in a fight. She said, I'm making a mistake, Amanda told me, her voice trembling. Are you? I asked. She shook her head slowly, tears forming again. No, she said. I think I've been making one for a while, and it wasn't choosing you. Things didn't magically get better overnight. Healing never works that way, but they got real. Amanda started seeing a therapist, started examining why she sought validation from friends who didn't respect her marriage, why she'd been willing to sacrifice our relationship to avoid conflict with people who clearly had their own agenda. I started setting boundaries, not just with her, but with everyone who thought my kindness meant I could be pushed around, that being patient meant being a doormat. Months later, we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, the sky painted in oranges and purples, and Amanda said something I'll never forget. I almost lost you because I cared more about what other people thought than what we had, she said quietly. I'm sorry, really truly sorry for making you feel like you had to prove your worth to people who never deserved your respect. I reached for her hand. Feeling the warmth of it, the familiarity. I know, I said, and that apology, the real one, the one that came from understanding rather than pressure, meant everything. If this story meant something to you, you're going to love what's coming next. Click that video right there for another story about someone who chose consequences over silence. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. I post new stories every week. Hit that bell so you never miss one. I'll see you in the next one.